I'm Diego Sanchez, president of HousingWire, and this is a special 30-minute talk. My guests today are James Dwiggins, CEO of NextHome, and Greg Sher, managing director at NFM Lending. Gentlemen, welcome to this special 30-minute talk.
Happy to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Before we dive in, could you each give a 60-second introduction of yourself and your company? And we'll start with Greg.
Well, this is my second time being on here. I'm honored to have the re-ask. I've been in NFM for a long time. Two big, huge chunks out of 26 years, from 98 to 2002, and then from 2009 until today. In between, I had a mortgage company that I was the president, CEO of. So I know this company very well. I've been in the industry going on 26 years, and I am mainly tasked with doing things that kind of lead NFM into business development arenas. So things around social media, marketing, recruiting, anything that can help us grow and achieve. I normally have a hand in moving those pieces around the board with, of course, an incredible team for us to be around this long. So I think that's 60 seconds.
That's great. How about you, James?
Yeah, so again, thanks for having me back, Diego. I've been in residential real estate my entire life, third generation. I currently run a national real estate franchise called NextHome. We have about 600 offices across the U.S. We're in 49 states. And I also, as you know, run a podcast that's pretty popular as well called Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered, which Diego has been on. If you haven't checked that one out, you should. So yeah, and then obviously I've been, unfortunately, talking about these lawsuits for years and have been ringing alarm bells, and myself and others have been pretty accurate on the outcome of all of this stuff. I know we're going to dig into that today.
Yeah, absolutely. You have been ringing those alarm bells for a long time and pushing NAR to settle for some time. Do you think that they negotiated a good settlement?
I think overall, yeah, I do. This could have gone a lot of different directions. And, without rehashing all of the stuff we've talked about in the past, I think based upon where things were with the outcome, the potential judgment, the options that NAR was facing, appeal wasn't an option because it would have just crushed the industry with all of the copycat cases, which we said would happen. And certainly bankruptcy would have been the only other direction for them to go. That they did negotiate something pretty well. There's things in it that I wasn't in the room. I can't speak to, what the conversations were with the plaintiffs' lawyers versus NAR. But I think overall it was a pretty big win for NAR. It's interesting, Diego, because there's so many people are freaking out about it. And I just had this conversation this morning. It was like, what really changed? Like, you can still sit down with a seller and offer buyer broker cooperation. Or compensation, you just can't put it on the MLS. Doesn't mean you can't still do it on your own website or your office website or in your advertising or social media. Somebody can't call you and just ask. So there's some changes, but if you think about from a structural perspective, if sellers agents wanted to do things the way they've always been doing it, we move on. There are obviously some pieces of this that were difficult. So the 90 plus large brokerages that weren't included, that's certainly a problem. And I think there's a lot of animosity there, understandably, that they weren't involved in that discussion. They weren't brought in. That's not news. So certainly there's some stuff there that's going to happen. I think NAR is going to have some issues. This is one that I think is a problem for NAR that it needs to face, that you have to be a member of NAR when the class notice is finalized in July, but you don't have to continue to be a member of NAR a year later. So to me, that was an interesting one. Like, it's a 4-year payout, but you didn't require people to be a member of NAR for 4 years, I think is interesting. I wouldn't have done it that way myself, but that, again, I wasn't in the room. I can't speak to the terms that were there. I find it hard to believe a plaintiff wouldn't agree to that, considering their money comes from NAR over 4 years. Membership is key to that money being paid to the plaintiffs. Like, that would seem like a logical negotiation. But, look, I think NAR has got some serious comms problems. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. They definitely need to work on communicating things. The other side of that is there's certainly some bad stuff in here. And I'll state that, we left veterans out of this thing. I mean, they're just screwed because without an offer of compensation, veterans aren't going to be able to pay for representation. That obviously is not a good thing. There are a lot of little details in here that need to be worked out, and certainly there's not a lot of clarity in the market right now. But there's stuff that we need to pay attention to.
Yeah, things that need to be worked out pretty quickly, including the veteran stuff. So how is NextHome going to be navigating this aftermath? I don't think you're one of those 90 brokerages that were left out, but
all of our offices are covered. All of our offices are covered under the settlement agreement. None of our offices do over $2 billion. So this isn't actually something about navigating. We already pre-trained everybody. So last year, before the judgment even happened, we trained all of our offices. And this isn't complicated. This is sellers agents doing what you've always done. You have to explain to sellers that compensation is negotiable. That's one of the things that's going to have to happen with it. Great. So what? That doesn't mean you can't set your own rates. It doesn't mean you have to negotiate. It means to tell them that there's not a set fee. I can still charge what I want, unless we want to get rid of capitalism in America. So the agent can still sit down and say, this is what I'm willing to do to work for you for. They can still tell the seller that it's smart to offer compensation, or we could do it through a concession. That's another way to do it, through the MLS. You're going to see all the MLSs, by the way, 100% will put a concessions field in place so that the seller can offer a concession. It just can't be stated to go towards buyer agent compensation. Great. That's simply verbiage. And we train them on why it's important. First-time home buyers are not going to be able to afford representation. So it's important that if you want to sell your house, expect if your home's going to be bought by a first-time home buyer, we encourage you to keep this in mind, because every purchase contract is going to come across with a stipulation that you need to pay the buyer's agent's compensation, which, by the way, is legal. And the DOJ has stated that in their statement of interest. So I think there's just some training and some getting kind of the people to understand that there's some different ways to do it. So sell side, you can still collect it and pay it. You can still do a concession on the MLS. Buyer's agents can write a purchase contract with a stipulation that they pay it directly. You could ask for a concession. The buyer's agent can be paid by the buyer. And then, of course, the piece I know that is happening right now is there'll be a significant push with NAR, working with Fannie and Freddie and others. I have some large mortgage partners that are in this process of figuring out ways to make sure buyer's agents' compensation could be fully financed into the loan. And that's the last piece. That's an important part, Diego, because what we don't want, and I'm going to make an attorney joke because I get to, nobody wants to have the public defender representing them in court. We should be able to afford and pay for representation that we want. And so in my take is the ability for a buyer to choose to finance that compensation because they want to work with a certain representative should be a choice that they have. Doesn't mean they have to. It's a choice that they should have and be able to make, so that we're not hurting low-income buyers and minorities, which is candidly where some of these things could affect people.
Greg, you started tracking these lawsuits much earlier than most mortgage executives. Why do you think it's important that mortgage professionals pay attention to what's happening here?
Oh man, I've got like 4 things I want to come back to James on.
Yeah.
So we'll do that. We'll do that in a moment. I'd like to do a point counterpoint, but it's obvious we need to pay attention, particularly IMBs that rely on referral partners, because that's our bread and butter. Like we're viable, we're profitable in most years because we've got such deep, great relationships with buyer's agents. It's not the seller's agents, that are giving us a lot of the business, although there is crossover, obviously. But we rely on that. And the concern is for 50% of our population, our loan officer population, they rely on a smattering of buyer's agents who do 1 to 2 loans a year. So you can imagine, and there are loan officers out here that fall under this category, that you do $70 million a year in production, which is a big number in mortgage. If 80% of that business comes from 1Z, 2Z buyer's agents, and now all of a sudden those buyer's agents potentially are in a position where they're going to make less, the job's going to be more complicated, they're going to have a choice to make. Maybe I want to go do something else full time. And I think that's the danger for companies that are built like ours, that all of a sudden now, I really think this is going to bolster the listing agent, right? They're going to become more of an expert. They're going to become even more well-rounded than they already are. They're going to work harder to articulate the value potentially on both sides where it's legal. And I think that, that's a major concern. I'm sure James is like, I want to say something to Greg, but I get to go first, James, because I have things written down here. Okay. Let me just say a couple of things here. I mean, the way you explain it, James, it's almost like it's like, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, but the feeling I got, the way it landed is this is, people are making this out to be a bigger deal than it is. So I've talked to a lot of agents, tons of them, and they're scared out of their minds right now. And I was with one last night for an hour and a half. She's a prominent agent in the Northern Virginia area, has no idea where this is going or how it's going to affect people. And her buyer agents' friends are very concerned that, they may get out of the business. The one thing I want to talk to you about, James, is kind of the uncertain thing in here. And that is, yes, there's that field now. There's the ability for the concessions, but why are we going to assume that the seller's going to want to do that? The most keen sellers will have read this and they'll say, I'm not responsible for that anymore. I mean, on the last house I sold, I negotiated with my agent 2.5% or 2%. I'm not paying more than that right now. And so you might say, well, then you're going to have less traffic. Yeah, you're going to have less first-time homebuyer traffic. Sure. But there's no shortage of people with money that want to buy houses right now. So this really boxes first-time homebuyers out. It puts them in an even worse position. I hate it. And so, I know I've said a lot, James. You're muted right now, by the way. You're muted. But let's go back and forth a little bit and have a conversation about it if Diego will allow us to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I want you guys to talk to each other. I mean, it doesn't depend on how hot the housing market is, right? Like if it's a hot housing market, why would I want to compensate the buyer's agent? I'm going to get plenty of traffic.
So two comments, Greg. I don't think it's as big a deal as everybody says it is because candidly, I'm very well educated on all of these things. And if Diego will tell you, every single thing that was in that settlement, I said literally was going to happen. I think there's a lot of lack of education. I think NAR comms has been horrific, to be clear. There's a lot of headlines that are scaring people and people don't read past the headlines. I was just on a call with 100 people who were asking questions that I'm like, that's not what that means. You can do this. What clarity around, what can I put it in the comments field of the MLS? No, you can't. So there's a lot of lack of understanding that's going to sort itself out. Prior to the MLS, this was actually very common. The process we're going back to, which I'm not saying is better, to be clear, so we're not putting words in my mouth, but you had to call the person and ask if there was an offer of compensation before the MLS. It's not actually anything new. You go back to my grandfather's day of doing that in 1967. So also the most important thing I would tell you is pay attention to the Northwest MLS. So this entire process that you're seeing today was enacted in October of 2022. And almost everything that's in this settlement today has been active for going on a year and a half. And what you'll find is almost nothing has changed. It has a lot to do with how the seller's agent communicates with the seller. I'm not disagreeing with you on that. There's certainly going to be sellers, and to your point, Diego, that go, well, I don't want to offer compensation. To be clear, for all the lawyers listening, it's always been that way. That's not actually anything new. You could have put $1 in the MLS for as long as I've been alive. And there's going to be an education process. I do agree with you, Greg, 100%, and Diego, that there's going to be in a hot market where we've got 15 offers, there's going to be people that don't want to do it. And I get it, which is why I made the comment that giving the ability for the buyer to finance buyer's agent compensation is going to be a crucial part of this process so that you don't have to go in with everyone's offers have a stipulation of paying the buyer's agent's fee and then the seller gets to choose which one's the cheapest. That's an irrelevant part of the offer process in this future because there's mechanisms for the buyer's agent to be paid different ways. And candidly, look, I'm going to be really blunt. Good riddance to agents that can't figure this out. I'm going to piss some people off. We have too many of them. This needs to be more professional industry. If there's going to be 40%, which is what I'm projecting, Greg, of agents are gone, they can't articulate their value, they can't show people what they do, then they don't belong in this business. Here's the counterpoint. I think really good agents are going to charge more. I think they're going to learn how to talk about their services in a very clear, articulate way. Every single survey I've read, all of them, not just some, every survey I've read shows buyers want representation. They're willing to pay for representation. because this is an infrequent transaction they do not understand and may do 3 times in their life.
Well, can they afford it? And furthermore,
And why it needs to be financed.
Yep. Let me get to that. You took me right to where I was going.
Yep.
Is it smart to encourage first-time homebuyers to finance, 2% of a $400,000 loan amount over 30 years?
Absolutely.
Really?
Absolutely. 100%. Because I'm going to give you 2 stats. I'm going to give you 2 stats right now for it. The 2 most common reasons that people end up in lawsuits in a real estate transaction. The first one is an unrepresented buyer who didn't understand what they were purchasing, didn't understand the contingencies or the offer process. The second one, which you alluded to earlier, is dual agency, which is why 9 states currently ban it. And I think you'll see this be the next big thing with the DOJ, is to get rid of dual agency across all 50 states. And I'm going to be very clear with you. I hate dual agency. I don't agree with it. There's a reason why lawyers can't represent both sides of both parties. It's because you have bias. So I think you're going to see a rise in dual agency, which is what you were kind of alluding to, I think, earlier. And I think it's going to get squashed because that's the next big thing that they're going to come after. And to be clear with my words, dual agency meaning the same agent representing the buyer and seller. I have no issue with 2 agents in the same brokerage. I have an issue with the same agent representing both sides.
Well, I love this back and forth, by the way. I'm enjoying it so much. I threw the question out there, and you said absolutely that we shouldn't deter first-time home buyers or any buyer financing 2% of a loan amount over 30 years. And you might come back to me and say, I was expecting you to say, because this has been the answer some people have said, but you seem shrewder than most, that, they've been doing it anyway. I mean, they've been financing more of the, they finance the mortgage fees. There's a lot that gets financed into that. But then I'd come back and say, well, but clearly they did it while being misled, and having. What
does that mean? What does that mean, misled?
Going back to the root of the suit, that sellers were not given a clear roadmap on what was involved.
Greg, the disclosure documents and the listing agreement in Missouri literally states in the listing agreement that commissions are negotiable.
Yeah, let me just tell you what the real experience is like. Okay, what's written and what's real are 2 very different things. The last 3 or 4 houses that I have sold, I have said to my agent, "Hey, you charge. It's got 5.5% here. I'm more comfortable with 5. Yeah, I don't think so. My firm's not comfortable going below that. We're going to stick with 5.5%. You might say, well, go find another agent. I get that. But if everyone's playing by the same, bastardized rules.
No one's playing by the same rules. You know who Redfin is, right? Do you know who Help You Sell is? Do you know who Assist to Sell is?
Yeah, sure.
I get down a list of 17 companies if you did a Google search that would show that. Like, that's your broad brush stroking things. That's just not actually accurate. That Help You Sell was invented in 1976.
I think we're brush stroking both ways, is my point.
I'm not, to be clear, commissions have always been negotiable. If a company says they don't want to negotiate their compensation, let me put it this way. If I came to you and said, I want you to do my loan for 25 basis points, what would you say?
It would depend.
You do it for 25 basis points?
It would depend on the rate that we settle on.
So, but do you have a minimum that you're willing to do to work with me for? Or you willing to do it for anything?
Yeah, as long as we don't lose money. Yeah, we're not a nonprofit.
Okay, but you get to choose that, right?
As the consumer or as the salesperson? Let me make sure I'm on the right side of the conversation.
As the person who's doing the business and offering the service, you get to choose what you're worth, correct?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. How is that any different?
Can you finish that question? How's it any different than what? I know what I'm comparing here.
How is it any different than a realtor saying, I'm not willing to do it for less than X percent?
I think it all depends on how it's couched. In the past, when I've spoken to agents, it has seemed, very absolute that this is the standard. So while everything is in writing and I'm responsible for reading, when you're hiring somebody to rep you and to have your best interests at heart, and I think, isn't that at the root of the suit? Like, can I ask you should the suit have never happened? Did they settle for no reason? Obviously there was some truth in this, and that can be painted with a broad brush if you're to believe that,
Diego, do you want me to go down this? I'm happy to answer these questions.
I think we should pivot a little bit. I think we could go down a rabbit hole with that. And what I would say is, I think commissions have always been negotiable, but you have people who are doing transactions that they only do once or twice in their life. And so when a good agent says, well, I'm not going to take less than X, maybe you don't negotiate as much. So like, I think there's arguments for both sides there.
Greg, I'll add this and then we'll move on. So do I disagree with the fact that we should have a buyer's agent sitting with a buyer and negotiating compensation before showing a property or knowing what compensation is being offered on the home? I agree with that. So I actually have no problem with this. So I'm very vocal about it. I think a buyer's agent should sit down with a buyer, communicate their worth and value, and agree on compensation, which has nothing to do with what the seller's offering. Controversial statement. I have no issue with it. Now I'm going to give you some data, then we'll move on. Do you know what the average commission rate was in the United States in 2020 when almost all of these suits were filed?
In terms of which side again?
The average commission rate that was charged in the United States in 2020 when most of these commission suits were filed. Do you know what it was?
4.5%?
4.94. You know what an average is? Obviously, you're in lending, which means people were charging less than 4.94 and more than 4.94 in order to get to 4.94. So my comment is, there's this massive idea that the headlines say the 6%. It hasn't been, last time it was over 6%, 1991 was the last time it was over 6%. If 4.94 in 2020. So everyone's like, we're comparing to the UK and Australia. And I'm like, the rates were lower. You just got to look at the average. And I'll leave it at that because I know Diego has more questions.
Well, I think it was going down. It was on its trending down for sure. I think some of that has to do with some of the firms that you mentioned who charge a flat 1%, the Redfins and such. But Diego, I want to take this in a even more productive direction for some clarity on the mortgage side, James, because you know the real estate side so well. This idea that I would like you to give us some scaffolding around what's required for a buyer right now in terms of having an agreement before they walk into. Is it before they walk into a property? I mean, what's that going to do to foot traffic if now open houses take on a completely different life? If it's specific to, can you help clarify that? Because there's a lot of confusion. Thank you.
Yeah. So what happens is that if you're a member of the MLS, to be clear, okay.
Yep.
You're a member of the multiple listing service. Before you show a property, there has to be either a non-exclusive or exclusive buyer rep agreement that is signed. It's important to understand the differences. Non-exclusive means that if I'm showing you this house and you're not already under contract with another agent, so you have representation, you can agree to a non-exclusive, which simply means that I'm going to show you this property. And if you decide to buy it, you have to pay me because I just did work for you. We established fiduciary immediately. Okay. Exclusive means you're now in an exclusive contract, and over the next however period of time that we agreed to, you're exclusively working with me, and any property you go look at, you're working with me and I get paid. You're going to see a lot of crap around this. You're going to see a lot of brokerages try and move to exclusive. Does it have pros and cons? Well, I wouldn't want to be in the portal lead business with this new model because what's a lead anymore if somebody already signed an exclusive buyer rep agreement? So that's something to think about. And certainly it's going to cause buyers to want to sit down and go through a different process, which is I need to interview an agent before I start looking at homes. It has nothing to do with the listing agent at an open house because the listing agent is representing the seller in this particular case. So everyone's getting confused by that. You're not representing the buyer in that, you're representing the seller in that. So it's not, you don't have to have every person coming to an open house sign a buyer rep agreement because you're fiduciaries to the seller.
Okay,
Thanks
great.
For the question.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much for that.
Follow on there, James. The typical process right now for somebody looking at real estate is to go to one of the portals and set up a search and get pinged when a house that fits their needs comes up, right? Gets listed. How does that work now? How does that work now?
There's the $5 billion market cap value question. It's going to be a problem for them, for everybody, because what's a lead? Look, I mean, here's some other stats. I love stats. There was in 2021, there was something like 82 million leads generated on the portals. Pretty sure we still only sold 5 million houses. So the point is, when you think about it from the lead business, I think there's some serious issues that's going to happen there, because what is a lead anymore? That agent, if that client signed a buyer rep agreement on my website, it is now on Zillow and is inquiring under the Flex program, they're already there. That agent can't do anything with them. There's also an ethics violation if you start trying to encourage somebody to get out of a buyer rep agreement to come over and sign another one. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's going to happen here. However, I will counter this with the following. It is something the Department of Justice wants. It's something I'm wholly in agreement on, in that agents should establish fiduciary, and our industry has been awful at this for a long time. If you think about it, Greg, after Dodd-Frank, like all these things came into place to tighten up lending, to understand what people are being paid. There's disclosures in place. We need to do this on the buy side. And I'm not saying this is going to be the cleanest way to do it. I think it's going to go through multiple iterations, but a buyer understanding what they're doing, what the agent does, how the agent is compensated, which we need to be explaining to people. And there's also a benefit to the seller, because what seller wants 50 people walking through my home when only 5 of them are actually seriously interested in buying a property? Like, there's multiple sides to this. I think it's a step in the right direction.
Can I just have one follow-up real quick, Diego? On the non-exclusive arrangement that you sign with the agent before you walk into that property, does that have the fees laid out?
Has to.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, there's a great buyer rep agreement. I think they did it the best, candidly, is the state of Washington. I was mentioning before, a lot of this stuff's already in place in this state. They've got a 3-page buyer rep agreement, and it's just done well. It just explains everything, talks about commissions being negotiable. You not have to set just a percentage. It could be any type of fee structure. It's really well written out. It's actually been really well received in the market.
So Diego's going to kill me for asking you one more question. I've commandeered this, but this is a really germane question, Diego. Hope you don't mind it. As a lender, as all the lenders that are watching this, James, how can we show up being the most valuable possible to be a partner in this discovery process in a move forward world?
Well, I think the most important part, and I'll go back to what I said. So I have a joint venture with a lending partner, and I think the most important part is helping buyers have the ability to choose the representation they want. That could be, by the way, Greg, a company that charges a flat fee of $3,000 to help you buy a house. I'm not against that. Like, I'm all free market guy. Or I want to pay somebody that does everything. It's not a fee for service. I want just all of it taken care of. I want to work with the agent that's been here for 30 years that understands this market and everything with it. I think the lending industry needs to rally behind this, because here's the thing. I do worry, and I'm very serious about this. This was a call I just had 30 minutes ago. Some of this stuff without those mechanisms are going to hurt low income and minority buyers. There will be that. I don't want them to have to choose to pay for the $500 flat fee individual, no offense to them, because that's all they could afford. Because this is, and this is a complicated, infrequent transaction. And we all three of us know the number one driver of wealth in this country, especially for minorities, is owning real estate. So helping them be able to do that and in an efficient way and in a way they deserve is something I think is key. So lending partners, helping agents articulate value, making this process come together, working more succinctly together, I think is part of that future. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Oh, amazingly. Thank you for that. I think lenders appreciate that context too.
That's really helpful. And actually that takes care of the question about the partnership that I wanted to get to. So in closing out, because we're hitting 30 minutes pretty soon here, I think the mainstream media has kind of missed the boat here. Yeah. They've been covering it pretty poorly, and you've both highlighted how ludicrous some of the headlines.
I mean, the president was on video saying stuff that was just completely 100% inaccurate. I mean, that's common now, but like everybody's not had a headline that's actually accurate anymore.
Yeah, it's been pretty tough. Greg, you highlighted one recently where I think it was the Daily from the New York Times said something like homes are about to get ridiculous.
Homes are going on sale, and if this lawsuit if the settlement is approved, this could be the end of real estate agents and brokerages.
It was the New York Times?
It was the Daily, which is the New York.
Sorry, that's all the same to me anymore. Yeah. Like,
how absurd.
I mean, well, let's just hypothetically say a seller. I love this argument. I said this to a reporter and they didn't know how to respond to it, because I love just talking how stupid they are sometimes. I was like, you think that the seller doesn't going to offer, let's say the seller doesn't want to offer, compensation to the buyer's agent. You think they're going to lower the price of their house by that
They're going
amount?
to keep that money.
What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, there's no logic in anything you just said at all. Like, they're like, okay, well, because I'm not offering it, I'm going to reduce the price of my home by whatever amount. You got to be kidding me. You know, it's like just emotion coming out with no logic behind it whatsoever.
Yeah, I'll just editorialize a little bit here. I think the sellers and the listing agents are the big winners here. And I think any commission decrease goes right to that seller's pocket in most cases.
It just goes to the point, Diego, that it's like the buy-side cases that are completely erroneous. And I don't think those buy-side cases are going to go anywhere whatsoever because the judge is already kicking most of it out. An agent doesn't sit down and increase the price of a house based upon the compensation. I've never heard an agent in the history of my life ever having that conversation. So it's just amazing to me, the misinformation going on right now.
It's also scary, though. It's really scary. I mean, that's the scariest part, is who is driving this bus? Like, who is the pilot of this plane? That's really frightening. And there's been some stuff on the mortgage side, too, that was wrapped into, Biden's State of the Union and things that the CFPB said that they want to look at. Some of them they put in place, and now they're saying potentially it's not a good practice. I mean, it's like you wonder if the inmates are running the asylum and what that means.
This has been a very difficult, and I don't usually say this out loud, but it's been a very difficult administration on this industry between the DOJ, the FTC, this stuff, even the EEOC, which nobody even has been looking into. Like, it's been pretty tough, and it's sad to me because there's just not truth to these things out there. And look, the other side of it is we're doing a shitty job. Sorry, Diego, but we're doing a shitty job as an industry of countering it. Like, we're not speaking up. We're not hitting the headlines. Like, I need Kevin Sears out on CNN and ABC and CBS. Like, we need the industry out talking, going, here's the truth. I know you want to see these changes, but like, this is reality of what we're talking about here, not conjecture, but like, this isn't going to shift the cost of housing like this. If you want to shift the cost of housing, we all know this, simple supply and demand economics. We're 7 million units short of housing in this country. If you want to lower the cost of housing, build more houses.
Absolutely. All right. Well,
we could go on for hours.
We really could. And maybe what we need is we'll just do a sequel in a couple of weeks, because I'm sure there'll be more fallout and we'll have a great conversation then. But gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate you taking the time. I think this has been a really good conversation.
Thanks, Diego. It's nice to meet you, Greg.
Yep, great to meet you, James. Will you be at the gathering?
I will be, of course.
Drinks on me.
I will be the tallest guy in the room. Just look for me. So.
Okay, you know what? I'll be the shortest guy in the room, so this will be perfect.
Look forward to it. Talk to you guys.